Founder of Something, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him is Daniel Sanderson, CEO of Planksip, an international philosophy and cultural media outlet, helping emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. Tonight's episode, Cold Hard Facts About Antisemitism, with Aleksandar Veljic.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Created in the Image of God. I'm here with your co-host tonight, Dan Sanderson, and we have a very special guest tonight who's virtually in the studio. He's actually in Serbia, sleeping, but we pre-recorded the show, and we'll roll that in just a second. Tonight's format will be a little different to accommodate our guest. We pre-recorded it, and the segments are somewhat long. There's a lot of information, a lot of history being covered, and so we'll probably interrupt them a time or two to invite your comments, to invite Dan and I then to comment on Aleksandar's comments or your comments. So we'll play this by ear and hope all the technology works out, but I want to encourage you right up front to put your comments in the chat. We will be watching it even though this is a pre-recorded session. You're going to notice very shortly that I have a different sweater on. That's the virtual me who pre-recorded this episode with our special guest, Aleksandar Veljic. Here we go. The role of religion in society. I'd like to thank you for tuning in today. We have a very special guest studio. His name is Aleksandar Veljic, whom I know as Sasha. And I guess the first question for our esteemed guest is how he would like to or prefer to be referred to on this show. And where does that Sasha come from?
Well, it's a very common nickname for Alexander in Slavic world. So you'll find Sashas all over the Slavic world. And my mother loved the Russian fairy tales, and there is another nickname for this name, Alexander, but she didn't want people to call me that one. She preferred Sasha anyway. So I've stuck to that one. That gives me unique features, and everybody knows when you say Sasha in the Western world, at least everybody knows it's me. Yes, it's also a female name, but you have also female names and male, both female and male names in your languages, like Kelly and so on. And then, you kind of get accustomed after a while. But this is some kind of unique feature of mine. And I thought, keep it. Not many people are known as Sashas anyway.
Thank you. And when you mentioned Russian fairy tales, I remember when I was studying Russian, I had a series of beautifully illustrated Russian fairy tales. I think they're called kashki or something like that.
That's right, Skaski. Yes. Yeah. Skaski or the fairy tales. Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
now, are they like the Brothers Grimm? Are they like the Brothers Grimm
yes, the
tales,
Brothers
or
Grimm.
even grimmer?
Well, no, Russian culture is very not much known to the world, but Russians are very, very interesting. It's an interesting mindset that I keep ever since the start of this horrible conflict. I told all of my friends very frankly from the very start, there is no way you can conquer the Russians because they're just mindset like that. They'll just die to the last man for whatever cause they think is right. They're the ones who helped us actually liberate Serbia in the Second World War, and they're people who just it's 70 below zero in Siberia. You would probably get frozen there where you are. I'll get frozen here. I've just read the news that the latest cold wave claimed about 83 lives in the States. And in my book, it talks about a horrible genocide, which was helped very greatly by the tremendous cold, and yet Russians just function. How do they do that? What is the driving force in them? Only dear God knows. But it's a nation that doesn't know for the word defeat. And I told my friends since the very beginning, I said, the whole world is going to have terrible problems with Russia. There is no way that you can, with all the military aid and with all the help and all the financial packages and help to the Ukrainians. There is no way. There is no way because the history, again, people think history is like something dead. a dead letter in on a paper, but people don't realize that history is like a living matter that just is just fluid, and it very often just goes in its own circles, and then it just completes the whole full circle, and
Well,
then at the end of the
we'll get
circle,
into the big picture geopolitical history here in the next
right,
segment. This segment is going to go into your personal history,
my
your
personal life. Well,
your
so
personal
ever
origin
since
story, right?
right, so ever since I was born, obviously that name Sasha meant something, and I was very good at Russian because we had Russian in the elementary school. And to me, Russian is kind of very soft-spoken language. Not much. Serbian is very sturdy language. We have very sturdy. Well, I guess the whole nation is like that, so that reflects in the language. But Russians, when they speak, they have these very sweet sounds when they pronounce and how they speak it. So I guess that was even though my origin, my mother's grandmother was Jewish, uh, descendant of Polish Jews, and that was hidden from me for a long time because she lived in Croatia, and Croatia has throughout the history been very anti-Semitic and very Nazi-oriented culture. Sadly, actually, the um, most faithful allies to Hitler were the Croatians and the Hungarians. And the Croatians were just, the problem with Croatians, just like with any nation, is when they want to create an ethnically cleansed nation. That's the cause of genocide, basically, all over Europe. People may not realize that, because American society is very much civil oriented, and it's being civilian. That's what is the core. That is the center of your identity. In Europe, it's not. In Europe, it's disputes over the territories and this claim that there is somebody is a clean nation, like clean Hungarians or clean Croatians or clean Serbians or clean whatever. And then that's how people usually get into conflict because of those things. So I've learned from very, very start. Uh, I've learned because my mother was basically considered to be Croatian, even though she was having much of the Jewish blood in her. My father was Serbian, and I grew up in Serbia. It is very unique nation on its own terms. But all of that things kind of make one realize that ethnic origin is something lovely and beautiful, and it's if God created variety in all the living among the living creatures, then He created variety in the human race. Plus I grew up in a country called former Yugoslavia now. It was very known for being part of non-aligned movement and kind of being a pain in the neck to both the Russians on the east and to the Americans to the west, cooperating with both of them, and yet taking the best from both of those cultures. That was one good feature of former Yugoslavia, which had its as a nation has its own 6 main nations and several other smaller nationalities. And there is one smaller nationality, Wallachians, for example. My other great grandmother was Wallachian, and I didn't really realize all those things because it was all kind of kept as a secret. But sometimes deep down, when God creates you, He just gives you the traces or the spark of all of those nations, and you find it. Sooner or later, you find who you are.
Thank you. So I want to dig in a little bit deeper to that. So, and I'm trying to remember my history now, but Tito was over Yugoslavia, and was that while you were a young child still? Was
True,
it under
yes, I was
Tito's
born.
Yugoslavia that you had your original,
Yes, yes,
experiences?
yes. I was under Tito's Yugoslavia, and under Tito's Yugoslavia, any sort of chauvinism and nationalism was forbidden, which is, nothing was wrong with that. And what was promoted was the equality of all the nations and so on. And that's how, from the very early age, I've been exposed to various South Slavic languages, Slovenian, Macedonian, for example. Montenegro people have a little bit of their, so all those nations have their own dialects. Most of them understand.
But was your native tongue then Serbski Kravatsky.
Yes,
I
yes,
haven't
that's right.
said that in quite a
Serbo-Croatian.
while, but yes.
Yes, Serbo-Croatian was
Serbsky.
the
My lips are a bit frozen because I've just came in from outside and it's been quite cold here
right.
in Wisconsin.
Well, I can tell you it's about
Blah.
minus. It's 6 below 0 as far as I can see here
Yeah.
on my thermometer on. So it's cold wave all over the
So
place.
then you experienced as a young man the breakup of Tito's
Yes,
Yugoslavia?
because the official language would be Serbo-Croatian or Croatian Serbian, whatever. Serbs and Croats basically speak the same language, but it's just two different dialects, But they perfectly understand one another. And when people would ask me, how do you make distinction between Serbs and Croats? Well, there's no distinction. They all look alike. I mean, they're just like all the South Yugoslav people are basically white race, so there's no racial difference between them. And you can just only by the dialect, when they speak a dialect and when you hear specific words for that dialect, you can say, oh, this person must be Croatian or that person must be Hungarian. Hungarians have their own mistakes with the making Serbo-Croatian, ethnic Hungarians who live in Serbia. Macedonians have got their own dialect. Slovenians have got their own dialect. So each part of the Yugoslavia was having their own dialect, but basically people can understand one another. It's not that.
The West views, many in the West view Tito as an authoritarian dictator, but actually, in a sense, he was a unifier. He was minimizing ethnic nationalism in favor of building a united Yugoslavia.
That's true. Well, you see, as long as he was alive, the whole country thrived. The Yugoslav passport was one of the most precious passports you could have. It was open door for every country.
But now Albania, for example, was like what, the resistor to this? They wanted to go a different route.
Well, Albania was always the world to itself, as you know. And that time when I was little, they had the bunkers. The borderline was just all like a front line. Nevertheless, today I have a Albanian friend because they're very good with making sweets and ice cream. So our ice cream seller here in winter is one friend of mine who is Albanian, speaks perfect Serbian anyway, speaks Albanian also very well, and very, very lovely fellow. He's very popular among many other people here. But when I talk to him, he tells me that nevertheless, in spite of the dictatorship that was in Albania, all the people are very educated. Some people even went to 2 universities, So the point is, not everything under the so-called socialism or communism was bad. There are things that you people in the West could not really understand. If I would tell you that under communism, your kids would have free schooling, free medical care, free holidays on summer and winter, and it will all be paid by the state. So let's say it's winter now and there is a school vacation and you just want to go to I don't know what resort in the country. You can just choose it and, you can just make reservation and you go. And the 15 days free, most of you in the West cannot even fathom that kind of society, but that's the society in which I grew up. And to a certain extent, it did affect me. I remember now my late good friend John Robinson, whom I think you also know him. He said once, "You're a communist," he said. I said, "No." I said, "I'm a Christian." Because some people view Jesus Christ as being the first communist, because that's from the way how he taught, compared to today's ideologies, it would look like.
And then in my study, and I'll admit this particular rendition that I'm about to give is a little bit biased, but it's an interesting one nonetheless. The early Christian church in Jerusalem is marked by Paul's, I believe it was Paul, or it might have been Luke in Acts, where it says, they sold, those that had land sold it, and they all pooled it, and they had all things in common. But then a few years later, you read about Paul asking the outlying areas for collections for the poor saints in Jerusalem. That is the argument that, yes, okay, you had these free vacations, but then you also had the bread lines, right?
Oh, certainly.
So
Well, because
you
Tito took in the '60s the credits from the States, and the '60s were like the booming area, the sweet golden '60s. What we most of us from that time, what we remember as being like in the golden state was the music. Rock music was popular in former Yugoslavia, meaning in Serbia as well, ever since the '60s. The first rock concert was held at the largest stadium of the nation, and it was 1961. And now, of course, to the shock of the older generation, how could the rock music, how could such a decadent music be played? But nevertheless, ever since, we have grew up, we all have grown up listening to American rock music. Russians didn't have rock music anyway, except one. I think there was one in the '90s. There was one band called Malako and the Milk.
Right.
So
well, you
was
also
it.
had the
But
famous. You also had the famous Scorpions and their anthem "Winds of Change."
Winds
When
of
I was
Change.
living in
That's right.
Germany, right, that was Gorbachev and Glasnost, Perestroika, and the winds of change were blowing through Europe
Right.
during the time when I was there.
Oh yes, indeed. So we listened to all that music and we grew up with that. So it's not that Serbia was some kind of Eastern Bloc's country with, there were some shameful situations when the Russians would come, for example. Perhaps there would be an excursion or something. And it was amazing. We had all the Western things that the Russians could not even dream of, like chewing gums and jeans and stuff. To them it was unimaginable. I remember once I was flying, can't remember where, there was a lady from Budapest. She was Hungarian. She picked up English just on the street, so she could speak English very well. But she told me that, for example, in those during the Cold War era, that was between America and Russia, that she went to Belgrade quite often, the capital of Serbia, to buy shoes because there were no shoes in the market in her place, which is very funny today when you look at Budapest being very internationally acclaimed city, very beautiful city on the Danube River. You can hardly imagine that, because many Serbs today go to Russia. Well, many Serbs actually go to. They would go, for example, at night at this time, and even our fathers would just go to Szeged, the southern city in Hungary, because everything was so cheap, and the food was so terribly cheap. So then, people were just coming back with trunks filled with all the goods from Hungary, for example. So I remember the so-called white cream, very famous white cream. It was like a cream cheese that we just loved, and they're wonderful things that Hungarians make. But again, obviously they were not as rich. Former Yugoslavia was incredibly rich. One of the reasons why they had to break it up was because it was a competition to European Union. You see, former Yugoslavia actually achieved what the European Union is now striving to achieve now, very unsuccessfully. All people lived in peace. Everybody had equal chance. Everybody was, there was plenty of money, because the industrial production was on a very, very high. And even it seems that even to this day, after the 30 years of the breakup of former Yugoslavia, still all these people who want to plunder it have not succeeded to plunder it. How the prosperity of the country was amazing. It wasn't prosperous with so much diversity of products like you would find in the States or in Canada or anywhere else in the Anglo-Saxon world. But there was always enough for everybody.
So Dan, sorry for not giving you any warning before jumping into this, but I wanted to take a quick break here and highlight something. As you know, and I want to share with the audience, during the time when I lived in Europe, I crossed over Checkpoint Charlie, which was the no-man demilitarized zone between East and West Germany. And on the German side, on the Soviet side, they had, behind the wall, they had this area of cement, glaring spotlights, and automatic machine guns pointed at anyone coming over, but also anyone who might escape out of that over to the west. And that experience of going into this parallel universe on the other side of that wall, where information was controlled and a narrative was shared that was very different from any narratives that we had on the freer side of that. Certainly information was controlled. The Russian state newspaper was called Pravda, many may not know, pravda means truth, right? Truth. And that was a joke because it was, largely propaganda. It was the government line. It was what you were expected to hear. And this was a bizarre experience for anyone from the West. But part of the value of this show tonight, and I want to encourage our audience to think about this, as Sasha is presenting his view from inside a world, even with some degree of nostalgia, right? Looking back at the good old days of his childhood in the Soviet Union, it's very interesting, informative, and educational for us to reflect on this thing called the independent investigation of the truth. I'm right now drafting my second blog for something called the Interfaith Library. I'll publish it there. I'll share it on this show later. We're going to have in an episode or two a guest who hosts that Interfaith Library. But part of what this show tonight wants to do is to help us take a step back, listen to somebody who has in many ways a very different perspective from us, and derive some meaning, some learning, some truth from that. So he was talking about Hungary and coming back loaded with goods from Hungary. The other thing I want to share is that I was in Hungary also during that time, and in my experience in East Germany, within the Soviet Union, Hungary was like the Riviera. It was like the Bahamas. It was where you went on vacation. It was not only a little warmer, but it was a lot freer. The Hungarians were kind of going a middle path. They were early on having experiences with a non-controlled economy, with structured managed capitalism versus the communism. And so, as I mentioned earlier, you had certainly some good things, but then you also had the bread lines, right, where people literally couldn't get enough to eat in the winter in parts of Russia because of the centralized controlled planning, which also led to millions of people starving under communist regime in China because of centrally managed harvests and local functionaries not reporting up the truth because it was not good if you gave negative news up to the top. So I want to just highlight some of those aspects for the audience in this show. Dan, what are your thoughts and comments on these perspectives?
I feel like I'm just like in for the ride. I need a little bit more bearing on where we're going to be going with it, to be honest, Wade, honestly. That sounds a little bit like a scapegoaty answer. But it's...
Well, obviously, you know, so, and for the audience, Dan has not seen this pre-recorded interview, so he doesn't know really where it's going. But why so nervous, Dan? What's your reaction at the moment to what I've said so far? Forget about what might come. Obviously, you don't know that, and whatever caveat you want to throw in there, but I don't know where this is going. But what's your reaction so far into the comments that I've made here now?
Yeah, let's focus back on the checkpoint Charlie incident. A place that you have firsthand experience with, and adding additional perspectives of communism versus the fishbowl from which I live and where you live. You have the lucky ability to be able to transcend cultures and be in extremes of cultures, not just as a visitor, but actually as somebody that can speak multiple languages and has immersed themselves in other cultures, right? I have a tremendous amount of respect for you on the fact that you know how to teach, and you've taught, I mean, in a spirit of spiritual teaching in multiple countries from around the world in multiple languages, right? So the reason for kind of like my humbled...
That just allowed me to multiply the errors that I taught. But anyway,
that's
go
good.
ahead.
And no, you're kind of right. But my feeling on it is, and I'll say maybe a broader statement philosophically, is that I tend to try and have this like omniscient view perspective, and I know that's in itself kind of a replicator.
How about objective versus omniscient?
Well,
because objective to be objective is frankly almost as difficult as to be omniscient, because I don't think it's possible to ever be truly objective. But to say that I'm striving for objectivity is a little bit more humble than saying I'm striving for omniscience.
But I'm doing it from a norm that I come from, right? So I find that objectivity is something that is falling into the realm in our language that is more cliche. I'm trying to be objective. And what does that really mean? And so we're on a show that talks about the role of religion in society, as you know. And I'm the secular believer, as I said before. And I'm sitting there saying that I'm trying to take an omniscient view. Well, this is an anathema to somebody of a secular origin, and I say goodbye to you. If you're not willing to participate and listen to the nuance of the conversation, and what I actually mean by omniscient is we can actually almost start to inhabit that space and try and relate as if we have some sort of foreknowledge and some sort of ability to abstract towards the future, which that's what we're participating in. That's what I want to convey to my secular friends if they haven't left the room, right? Okay. But they also want to bring in my religious brethren and say, is that what we're doing when we have a relationship with God? And they're gonna be looking at me a little bit with like a raised eyebrow, kind of.
Well, and we won't have that much religion in here tonight. Mm-hmm. But with that, I mean, I think that's a nice little sort of break segue. I'm going to now re-roll the tape. I fast forwarded a little bit because Mr. Sasha can hold forth and go in a lot of directions. So I was trying to rein him in and get to the topic at hand. But thank you, Dan, and hopefully the audience enjoyed that little break in terms of what this show's about, where it's going, maybe. And please do continue to put those comments in the chat, and we will get to them later. Well, let's get back now to our guest and the pre-recorded interview.
So forth.
Well, thank you. We've covered already so much ground in this initial opening segment, and I hope that the audience is enjoying insights, even if it's kind of like feeding from a fire hose right now of information around a different world. I want to take a step back and level set a couple of things for the audience and for this show, right? So many of my viewers know pieces of my history, some know a lot of it, but I spent almost a decade in Europe as an adult. I also lived in Europe as a child. That's another story. But the issues that, or rather the perspectives that I gained as a child informed my desire to go back to Europe, and I got to be there during a time when the Cold War was ending and the Soviet Union was collapsing. What Putin calls the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century, the collapse of the Soviet Union. I got to witness it and watch it. And to your point about the Russians and their ideology, it was a moment in time when I was in Leningrad, St. Petersburg, during the coup, or at the end of the coup, when Gorbachev had been abducted and taken down to Adacha on the Black Sea, and tanks were literally coming into St. Petersburg from Moscow to put down the rebellion. And I came in through Finland to visit with a small team of people who were at the Radio TV Leningrad studios introducing Western programming into the Soviet Union. And when that small group of volunteers said, we're staying during this time of crisis, we're staying with our new Russian friends. And I was told to stand down and not go in. I said, if they're staying, I'm going, because I was there to give them moral and spiritual support as a minister, as a pastor, and also to provide some supplies to them. So Western supplies that they were missing, to your point about limited options, right? I can't now remember whether it was Doritos or what it was that they wanted from the West, but I was bringing them their things that they want. So I came in and the streets were deserted because everyone was terrified of these tanks that were coming. And I didn't know I was heading into these tanks, but the tanks stopped 50 miles or 50 kilometers outside of Leningrad, laid down their arms, and they said, we are not opening fire on our own citizens again. This is not the day of Stalin. And the coup ended, and then we saw Yeltsin rise to power. But my point for painting this picture is this. In discussions with these young Western-oriented Russians, this was the moment when the realization hit me. Everyone on this planet believes that they are right. They believe what they believe because they believe it's right. And these Russians were so blind to the deep-seated hatred that the satellite nations had for them. They were telling me in this time of crisis, these satellites will return to Mother Russia to support Mother Russia. And I'm like, are you kidding me? How could they be so blind as to think that Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania were going to come to the aid of Mother Russia, right? Well, that's when, as the Germans would say, the penny dropped, and I realized they think they're, of course they think they're right. Of course they think they're
because they liberated those three from the Nazis, and by the way, you probably know that Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Well, they kind of liberated them, but all those three were very much Hitler's.
It's a matter of perspective, right? And so anyway,
it's a matter of perspective,
that's when I began at that point, even in terms of my own association with my own religious group, to think about, well, God help us, whoever gets in charge and begins enforcing their ideology on everybody else. So this is the viewpoint that the West has of Tito and his Yugoslavia, and maybe it was a time of peace and unification and well-being, but in the West, we were viewing it as him enforcing his ideological viewpoint on these various ethnic peoples. And so the idea of Balkanization enters our language. And Balkanization, for those who are too young to know or never thought about it, is the fact that you allow all these individual identities to become dominant, and then people start killing each other over their identity issues. Now, this is a topic that we see playing out in our world today, and religion can become a unifying factor because it transcends national and ethnic identities and provides spiritual principles that in theory can unite people. Now, that's a whole backdrop for some of the things we're going to discuss, but more specifically, Sasha Aleksandar Veljic is an historian who has done original historical research on a very specific set of atrocities, genocide that was perpetrated against specific identities within Serbia under or during the time Serbia had a Hungarian regent placed over it in World War II. So this has been helpful, hopefully, background as to know who Aleksandar Veljic is, what formed and shaped him, and especially partly the Jewish heritage that you were aware of, and as to why your fascination to dig so deep and to travel the country and to look up gravestone markers and find names and document the names of people. So we're going to go to commercial break, but when we return, we're going to now start asking Aleksandar Veljic to tell us about his journey of interest in going in and performing this historical research, which eventually resulted in a couple of shorter books in Serbian that were then translated and compiled into this book, Genocide Revealed. So don't go anywhere. Stay right here. When we come back, we're going to look at this work of Sasha Aleksandar Veljic. We'll be right back. Just a quick plug, we will be giving away a free copy of that. I think I mentioned it in the next upcoming segment of this pre-recorded interview, but I wanted to mention it here. Put your comments in the chat, and we'll pick one of you to give a free copy of that book from Aleksandar Veljic. Now we'll flip back to the pre-recorded interview. Welcome back to the Created in the Image of God show. I'm here with historian Aleksandar Veljic, author of Genocide Revealed. Before the break, we learned a little bit about his history, the background, the broad canvas of geopolitical history in which he emerged, and his initial experiences and views on that landscape that is perhaps so foreign to many of us in the West, but so familiar to him. Welcome back, Sasha.
Welcome, hello, yes, greetings, and cold wave continues outside, so...
Yeah, well, here the conversation is just heating up. Just heating up. So
right.
tell us now where the original interest came from to begin documenting these atrocities that happened so long ago now. I mean, it's now going on what?
82 years, yes,
82
exactly,
years,
82 years. Well,
yeah.
The greatest atrocity on this very night tonight is 21st of January, as we're talking. That was the first day of the 3-day massacre that happened in Novi Sad, which is the administrative center of the northern part of Serbia. Today, it used to be Austro-Hungary in the past. Part of, I guess, my identity is the fact that the Serbian nations are known for destroying 2 world empires. One is the Ottoman Empire and the other one is the Austro-Hungarian Empire, because both empires ruled, over the various parts of Serb-populated lands. Including Bosnia and Herzegovina, by the way. Bosnia and Herzegovina was never a German land. It was always a Slavic land and Serb-populated land. That's why you had this assassination famous in Sarajevo, and then people come up, oh yeah, of course, they started the First World War. Well, come on, don't be so myopic view. I mean, a bunch of young people who are just young patriots. They thought that if they killed the crown prince, they would just liberate their country. They never dreamed about starting the World War, but things happen and they take on their own course. And today the whole world says, oh yes, the Serbs have started the First World War. No, the whole Europe was ready to start the First World War because they were just fighting over the colonies. Those of you in Africa who didn't know that, now you know what is the First World War was all about. They were ready.
Isn't that interesting? Because we always do seek to blame somebody else.
Oh yes, yeah, it's always somebody else's fault. It's never your fault, certainly.
Right.
So the Serbs are guilty for the First World War. Never mind that the Germans and British were at each other's throat. Never mind that all the other European nations were just all against one another, just waiting for a spark to ignite it. And all of a sudden they found a spark in this happening in Sarajevo. By the way. Sarajevo is, by the way, a very beautiful city, and I wish I lived part of my life in that beautiful. Before this horrible civil war, Sarajevo was a paradise in heaven. What was New York in the '60s, that would be Sarajevo in before this horrible civil war. Nowadays, all the Serbs are basically expelled. Few remaining there. Muslims are having some kind of a dominance, but it's not the same city as it used to be before the war. And sorry that I'm saying that, but this is my greatest, I guess, one of the greatest traumas that I have in my life was the breakup of this former Yugoslavia, because we grew up in a totally, with the ideology that people are equal. We grew up with the fact that international bodies like United Nations, of which we know how unjust they are today, especially how they treat Israel, for example, and so on. We thought that the United Nations and the United Nations chapter and international law was something that all the people in the world will respect and all of that. And basically all that international law has been violated and trodden down by the United Nations in the case of former Yugoslavia. It's one of the greatest.
But let me slow you down. And in our little mini pre-interview, I shared with you that I would do this.
Right.
I would slow you down and make you unpack things a little bit for the benefit of our audience. So
yes, I'm listening. I'm listening.
So yes, I was hoping I hadn't offended you so much by slowing you down that you had to. Anyway, but so the view of the breakup of Yugoslavia is in the West, or at least my view of it at the time. And I was very interested in geopolitics at the time. As I mentioned, I was living in Europe around that era. And so the view is that, well, wait a minute, it was not, as you say, others wanting to break up Yugoslavia. It was the ethnic peoples within Yugoslavia that were asserting their own ethnic identity and did not like to be under the thumb of an autocratic ruler. And I suspect there's some truth to both things. What I want to understand from you is your perspective on were the enemies, if you will, or those who had maybe they weren't direct enemies, but they thought there was something to be gained by stoking the divisions of these ethnic identities. And do you see a parallel in the world today?
Yes, yes, I see.
Stoking the animosities between identities.
It scares me to death to have to tell you that, because it's true. Yes, there are people who want to have their own independent national states, like Croatians want to have their. That's okay. But nevertheless, you have to understand, we lived in two Yugoslavias. There was one before, right after the First World War, when we destroyed basically the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarians, and the second one came after the Second World War. We lived for decades together. We have a common heritage, common origin, whether people like it or not. And still, if people knew that making their own independent little countries would result in this kind of bloodbath, I don't think many people would. You have to realize that people were mixing also among the South Slavic people. There's 6 million of us who come as descendants in this whole nation. 6 million. Serbia today has about 6 million people. The 6 million of us come as the result of ethnic mingling between various South Slavic nations. So it's not a small number of people. So if people knew that this would be this bloody and horrible, I don't think people would ever. I was part of the Yugoslav movement of those of us who wanted to preserve that country, because Yugoslavia was very, very amazing country. You would never ever have a country like that anywhere in the face of the earth. That kind of. I can't even picture to you the sense of freedom we had. If you would travel from one part of the country to the other, you would never fear. Even today, you can go at night. You can just walk on the streets at night and not have any fear of any crime. It was the peace. You might say it's perhaps a result of autocratic rule. Yes, fine. I would consent to that. But if I were to choose between autocratic, such a perfect peace, and such a wonderful certainty, what I loved about American society, and what many people love about American society, for example, is the certainty. You don't have uncertainty, like there would be no your wage, at the end of the week, or there would be no this, that, and the other, or the government will come up with some crazy, stupid idea and deny you whatever, and that is what former Yugoslavia was all about. Yes, I understand it was a communist kind of regime, and it was a communist bubble in a sense. But when you think, when you would choose about this kind of perfect peace, and having this kind of division now, and hatred that people have, that the war in Yugoslavia hasn't stopped yet. Because the way how the Serbs and Croats hate one another, you wouldn't believe. There are no, I don't know. Let's compare it to Scandinavian nations, because you were in Scandinavia. It would be like if Norwegians and Swedish would hate one another today, to the point that they're willing to kill one another and stuff. You cannot imagine that. And it's true, you couldn't even imagine that in former Yugoslavia. Now, yes, there were people who want to have their own little national states. That's fine. But, they couldn't achieve it on their own. They had to have powerful allies who would just, pay them some money and stuff, very similar to what they're doing to Ukraine now, or trying to do to Ukraine. And that's what it was. So like here in the 80s, the German intelligence service was all over the place looking for those traitors who would very willingly be willing to be paid and destroy the former Yugoslavia. So yeah, there were enemies of that, and I'm not saying it was all idealistic. Sometimes, the Serbs being the majority nation, of course, sometimes they would just impose their own will. But the Croats didn't live any worse. If you would ask, average Croats, was it so bad, to live in Yugoslavia? Well, they would just say, yeah, it was politically dominated by the Serbs, but they were just always good wages, and we were not having these domestic criminals. When you listen to Serbs and Croats today, you just listen to different dialects, and all the societal problems are exactly the same. Corrupted government, a terrible private sector, all the things that you have seen probably in Russia. And, they have exactly the same problems. And yet And yet they didn't used to have that problem when they lived together. You see, the South Slavic people came into one nation because they were trying to live freely. They just wanted to have their own free, independent nation, so that they would never again, any of them would just fall under the Ottoman Empire or fall under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You see, but now today all these nations are lovely nations, have forgotten about it. So now they're just obsessed with this purity of nation. Can you imagine purity of nation? You talk about purity of nation, in a region that was populated originally by the Celts. There are Celts. There are traces of Celts everywhere in former Yugoslavia, all over former Yugoslavia. You have got Celts who obviously lived here before the Slavic elements came, and then they just merged with all those Celts. So, what kind of purity of nation are we talking about? What kind of baloney we're talking about? And plus me being from the ethnically, mixed origin, it was never really an issue of one nation being better than the other. Yeah, we certainly knew that there are certain things. With Croats today, I'm in touch. I have a very good friend his father is Croatian, his father is Serbian, his mother is Hungarian, but he grew up in Croatia. Can you imagine that? But we understand each other perfectly. We became very good friends, and we know that with the Croats have this sense for level, keeping things kind of to be posh and something like British people, how English with their posh cup of tea and stuff like that. The Serbs on the other hand are kind of more kind of crude people, but they're not evil, all the ethnic you wouldn't believe, you've got about 50, I think, or around 50 ethnic minorities living in Serbia to this day, including Gypsies or Romas, including Wallachians.
Well,
I mentioned Wallachians, and
yeah. So let's use that as a segue to get back then to the stage that predates your book. So we're talking the 1930s, and we're talking about Hungary and Admiral Horthy,
right.
who was already then a statesman, right?
Yes,
and he was. In your book, we have a couple of pictures of Hitler and Horthy together, and these are early in Hitler's reign, and he's clearly looking up to Admiral Horthy, perhaps as an example, right?
Oh,
and
yes.
we toyed. I recall when this book was being prepared for publication, what should the title be? One idea was Hitler's mentor, right? Which seemed too sensational to bring Hitler into the title, because this isn't a book about Hitler at all.
Right.
But nonetheless, why was that? What was the stage? What was going on in Hungary at the time of the mid to late 30s? And how did it come to be? How did it come to be that Horthy was a regent over Serbia?
Well, you see, what happened was back in those days, the communist movement all over Europe and place was very common, something very common anyway. So what happened was that Hungary at one point had what we know today in history as Paris Commune. Remember how the French used to have Paris Commune? French are very interesting as a nation anyway. They are one time they're Paris Commune, the other time they're monarchy, the third time they're republic, the fourth time there's something in between, the fifth time they'll just kill one another for religious purposes, the sixth time they'll stop and think, wait a second, why are we killing each other? Let's become a Catholic nation and all of that. So you had this kind of what is the English word? Disturbance. No, it's the wrong word. I'm looking for a better word, but I can't remember it right now. So in all of this upheaval, that's the word. Yes, in all this time of upheaval, what happened was in Hungary. That Hungary used to have a Budapest commune. Now, of course, that was horrendous. Of course, the Russians were not far away so the October Revolution happened already. And then you had these winds of change over Europe, in a sense that commune, the idea of people being equal and sharing equal power in power and having equality when it comes to living standards and stuff. Of course, that's all Now today I understand that's all silly, because people cannot be equal. I mean, I can never be equal to you in speaking Swedish language, and you cannot never be equal to me speaking Serbo-Croatian and stuff like that. But in any case, in those noble goals, there was at one point the Budapest Commune, and it just lived for, I can't remember how, but certainly for several months, sometimes in the last century. So Horthy was against it. He was an very rabid anti-communist. So he basically, walked into the Budapest on a white horse. That's why one book in Serbian calls him the Admiral on the White Horse. He walks in the white horse. He starts the terror over the communists and stuff. And that is his background. You see. Then, of course, in the meantime, Hitler started rising to Nazi power in Germany. Probably I don't know if our audience knows, but he didn't rise up all at once. It took several years for him to strengthen his grip on the power. In the meantime, you had another crazy Italian there on the other side. Mussolini, and with all his pompous Italian, presentation. And he stands there on the balcony, and he wants to restore the Roman Empire. That's why he attacked Ethiopia, for example. He wants the Roman Empire, so he's obsessed with the Roman Empire. Of course, Hitler fancies that, so they become good friends. And then here comes Horthy all of a sudden, and you may wonder. Now, of course, many Europeans read straight into what Hitler wants, so they just broke any diplomatic ties with him. But the first man, and this is what our audience should know, I think this is what all the world should know, because this is very important. The first ally to Hitler, the first one who broke any sanctions against Nazi Germany, was Hungary. It was Horthy. Why? Well, because Horthy saw an opportunity to restore the old Hungarian Empire from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he just saw the opportunity now with having a stronger ally. You see, it's always the same pattern. You look for stronger ally. Oh yes, I want to be my own independent nation. But hey, what do you hear when you listen to some modern Ukrainian politicians? Oh, all the time, our allies will send us aid. Our allies will do this, that, and the other. Well, no. Why did you in the first war, why did you oppress the Russian minorities in all those various territories, which people forget that that's how all this chaos started in Ukraine, which is now the third year of this war, and it's affecting us terribly, all of us, affecting us terribly economically. You can just imagine Russian oil. We all depend for Russia and Ukraine for oil. You can just imagine how much prices are going. The prices of fuel are skyrocketed, and immediately, as soon as the prices of fuel skyrocket, you happen to that in America with a ban on fracking. You realize immediately what happened to the fuel prices, and the fuel prices are skyrocketed. And when you go to the marketplace, we're all just kind of, oh no, look, the cooking oil. Well, when in the world did this get so expensive? Look at the flour. The government even had to step in and limit the amount of flour some people buy, because you know how people are.
Gentle nudge back to the time frame of Horthy and Hitler.
Horthy and Hitler. So Horthy sees his opportunity. If I join Hitler, if I extend my friendly hand to him, he will, he's going to give me all those territories because he's mighty enough. He's going to give me all the territories that we lost as once being part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And that's exactly what happens, That's why he was obsessed with borderlines. One of his co-workers gave a interview to one of the Serbian journalists, and I have that interview. And this Hungarian man says, obsession with borders. All of our Hungarian power figures were obsessed with borders, and returning to the size of the country that it used to be during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now he became regent because he could not become a Tsar, because the Tsar or the king remained in Vienna, in Austria. So he had no choice. Plus, he was not a Catholic. Many people don't even know that. He was a Protestant. He was a Calvinist, by the way. And Calvinism took very deep roots in the Hungarian nation. So many of their soldiers and many of their policemen were just of the Calvinist faith. So it's not, we cannot blame the Catholics for all the ills in Europe. as we all we have this tendency deep down in us. Oh yeah, horrible, horrible, decadent Catholic Church. What I think about the Catholic Church is another thing, but we cannot blame that because these people are Protestants, and Horthy was a Protestant anyway. So he saw his opportunity. He thought, well, let's just extend my friendly arm to Hitler. Hitler will be happy. He has at least one European ally. And Hitler is going to give me back parts of western Ukraine. Today, Lvov, city of Lvov sometimes shows up. That's the Carpathian, Transcarpathian Ukraine. Oh, he's going to give me the Romania, the famous Transylvania, known for its for its Dracula man. So he's going to give me Transylvania, and he's going to give me northern Serbia. Because that's what we have aspirations that those are Hungarian territories. That's how Novi Sad, the administrative center, and all the region of Bachka today.
All right. So that's a great point to segue quickly back into another commercial break. So, and I realized that at the first one I forgot to say, well, we showed, I believe, by the way, this is being pre-recorded. So when this is live, it may or may not be exactly the way I'm mentioning here. But we will encourage all of our audience to be writing comments and contributing to the discussion in the chat of whatever of our channels that you're viewing this on. And we will be picking one of you to receive a copy free in the mail of Aleksandar Veljic's Genocide Revealed. I do need to say we reserve the right to limit this to US distribution. It's very expensive for us to be sending books overseas. However, donations to the show might also help alleviate that in the future. But when we come back from this commercial break from one of our sponsors, we're going to now pick up where we left off right now, which is we have Hitler, we have Mussolini, and we have Horthy in this scenario, basically carving up the map of Europe and, obtaining their own goals and objectives. And this gives Horthy the freedom to now begin to pursue his personal agenda or oversee what he thinks is at least necessary to retain control and build this empire or his part in the empire. So when we come back right after this commercial break, we'll dig into what actually happened and why Aleksandar Veljic, Sasha, wrote the book Genocide Revealed. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. We're here with Aleksandar Veljic, and we were just discussing how Admiral Horthy, Hitler, and Mussolini were reaching agreements and temporary alliances, as it turned out, to carve up Europe and reshape Europe in their own vision of empire. And this was the context in which certain ethnic minorities and identities which were deemed undesirable, not only by Hitler, but also by Horthy, came into focus. And by the way, as those who were here from the beginning of the show learned, a lot of the decades leading up to this was all this turmoil of ethnic identities, national identities, religious identities, and the mix of these various and somewhat conflicting identities and alliances as people sought self-determination and also to extend and aggrandize their own particular choice of identities and what that led to. Back over to you, Sasha.
Right. Well, he saw the opportunity, Horthy saw the opportunity to grab parts of Europe. And I mentioned Lvov, the city of Lvov today, which sometimes you hear from the news of this unfortunate war in the Ukraine. And he wanted to grab Transylvania, which Hungarian people called Erdély. And there are about 2 million Hungarians living there, or at least they used to live in Transylvania. So he grabbed Transylvania from Romania. He grabs the southern part of Slovakia, including Slovakian capital Bratislava, which they call Pozsony in Hungarian. And he grabs part of the northern Serbia today, basically this the administrative center Novi Sad. And the region that Novi Sad really covers. As Novi Sad is a very interesting place. That north of Serbia has got the most diverse population in all of Serbia. So they've got about 30 plus nationalities living there. So there are Romanians, Slovakians, because of all this mixture that was happening over the years and centuries before. You have, you had the Slovaks who fled the Inquisition, and they're basically all the Slovakians, all the Slovaks living in Serbia are basically all of them are Protestants. Then you had Hungarians who were populated there by the Maria Theresia, one of the Austro-Hungarian empresses. Then the Germans came there because Germans were also obsessed with Danube. For some reason Danube was their big thing, and so they would just follow the flow of Danube. And of course the Danube flows to Serbia, and the most beautiful banks of Danube are, of course, in Serbia. Yes, sorry for sounding a little bit local patriotic, but it's true. Yesterday I learned, I didn't even know that the widest point of Serbia, the widest point of Danube is right in Serbia. Between I know where the cities are, but I had no idea, because now they're doing some infrastructure anyway. So the government was so happily announcing to us that this is the widest point of Danube and the most beautiful point of Danube. And guess what? It's found in Serbia. Oh boy. Well, anyway, but if you look at the tourist organization of Serbia, they have one presentation. They used to have it on YouTube about Danube and the river of Danube. The river Danube is fascinating. It's history. That's another story now. Anyway, the Germans were just following the flow of Danube. They at one point they even wanted to make a separate German Danube kind of a state. Hitler didn't allow that. Because many Germans lived also in north of Serbia, but in another adjacent region. There are 3 regions in the north of Serbia, and basically one region was grabbed by the independent state of Croatia, and they committed crimes that no, I don't want to go into that, because you won't be able to sleep tonight. If I would just tell you the way how human nature can be so deprived and so callous and so and so full of hatred for others. It's we see it today through all these modern wars, but it's not from yesterday. It has been in humanity for decades, for centuries. And at one point you have 6 different nationalities, different but related at least linguistically and so on, living in peace. You might say under dictatorial rule of one man, yes. And then the next time you see all of them hating one another, blaming one another, killing one another, and doing all kinds of horrible things. That happened to former Yugoslavia in the Second World War as well. So Serbia itself was hated by Hitler much because Serbs did not want to get into the treaty with the Axis powers. In fact, Serbia was the one. At one point, Serbia signed that treaty, but then the people the next day, there was a huge, tremendous demonstrations in the capital Belgrade, and they just overthrew the power. They overthrew the power, overthrew everything, and got rid of the. Hitler was outraged, so he ordered the bombing of the Serbian capital Belgrade on 6th of April 1941, and it was without any announcement of the war. Then all of a sudden, just German Nazi aircrafts just showed up, and then it was Sunday morning, so it was bombing, which was horrendous. Of course, the first institution that Hitler did, just to illustrate to our audience the mindset. The first institution that Hitler bombed, you would think that he would bomb, I don't know, a big hospital or no, he bombed the National Library.
Wow.
Why? Well, because the National Library has, all kinds of collections of various historical books and proofs of the, settlement of Serbs and all of that, and so on. So that was the first very institution that he bombed was the library. And then, of course, it was 6 a.m. So, people were just, Sunday morning, people were just probably going to have their cup of tea or cup of coffee, in the morning, but nobody expected a sudden attack by the Germans. And there was a sudden attack which left so many people, under the rubbles, who died under the rubbles and stuff, and destroyed the capital. And then the German forces marched in. But the German forces, Hitler was so mad at Serbs that he actually partitioned Serbia to its various allies. So once united Serbia, now you had Serbia divided into various allies, because part of Serbia was given to Bulgarians because they were the allies to Hitler. The other part, Romanians had an aspiration for another part, but that part of Serbia was populated heavily by the Germans, ethnic Germans. So Hitler didn't give them that. So Hitler just kind of it was kind of in formally within Serbian state, but still it was ruled really and practically by the Germans. Then this Bačka region, he gave it to Horthy. The other region on the north, he gave it to the independent state of Croatia. And the Kosovo Albanians, today very well known as supposedly great victims. I'm not saying yes, they've got some victimhood that they can claim, but Kosovo Albanians also sided with Hitler. So Kosovo, you wouldn't believe whom Kosovo was given. Kosovo was given to Italy, because Italians had certain pretense to Kosovo. So Italians were ruling Kosovo, and gained Kosovo as their prized possession. So all of Serbia was totally crucified between all these people. And then sometimes British press, there was one sentence in the British press at that time, and the British press said, "Oh, here are Hungarians and Bulgarians, and they're just competing who is going to be a greater killer of the Serbian people." So Serbia was singled out to be destroyed, and Serbia has got plenty of natural resources and all of that. So that was another reason why it had to be partitioned that well. And then some portion of central Serbia was occupied by the Germans. So Germans were there, but their allies were all over with them, And Horthy, as Hitler's ally, as Hitler's trusted ally, was given this part of the region of Bačka today, and Novi Sad, which last year Novi Sad was the European cultural what was the word? Cultural capital. So that was something very prestigious. So Novi Sad, with all this ethnic mixture, including many Hungarians, but never too many. It was never too many. Horthy wanted to have it Hungarian majority there, so that he could say that, oh yes, this territory has always been Hungarian. So that's why because Hungarians were not in such a majority, he actually devised this idea to change the ethnic composition of Bačka and Novi Sad. And with that kind of genocidal intent or premeditated genocide, he actually waited for January 1942, 82 years ago, and then he just unleashed his premeditated murder. Because Hungarians went and made the census, and the census would show how many people are of what their nationality, what is their profession, what is their religion. So they exactly knew how many Hungarians lived in various parts of Bačka, how many Serbs. And the south of Bačka, where Novi Sad is located with all its surrounding areas, was basically very poorly populated by the Hungarians, was mostly populated by the Serbs. And there was a good portion of the Jewish population, because the Jews were actually excellent tradesmen. How the Jews always trade very well. They're just all over the world for trading. And all the witnesses who told me, they will always tell me you wouldn't find anything in the Jewish shops. From little needle to locomotive, you just go to the Jewish shops. Here's the old Spira, hello, greetings, all that. And every time, even if you didn't buy something, they would just send some candies to your children, with you. So, the Jews were always very, very good tradesmen. Hungarians could not really be even close. And on the other hand, that part of Serbia is very rich in fertile land, and there were huge fields owned by the Serbs, who even to this day own huge fields. And so the Hungarians were basically just the servants. They couldn't really compete with the Jews, so they didn't even dare go to the trade. Because who dares to who cares to compete with Jews when it comes to trade? There is no way.
Yeah. So in this case, Hitler's hatred of the Jews was of a unique and virulent kind, whereas Horthy's, in that sense, was more practical and pragmatic.
Yeah, more practical. Horthy didn't really persecute the Jews. Even to this day, in Budapest, the largest synagogue in Europe is still in Budapest. Very well-known building. Well, it used to be free.
So what you're saying is basically he was trying to change the ethnic composition,
right.
so that Hungary could retain and claim control over time.
Exactly.
So his genocide was motivated not necessarily by racial hatred, but more by territorial ambitions.
More by territorial ambitions and aspirations, and he had to clean Serbs primarily. But of course, in order to be loved and respected by his big brother in Germany, he would just, the order was kill as many Jews as possible, But then, of course,
we will probably have to come back to dive into this a little bit more deeply and some of the details and facts about your book, because we're now running out of time. But I want to clarify one more thing for today, and that is, at what point in time because during the World War II war criminal trials, Horthy completely escaped. Stalin expressed admiration for Horthy as a staunch anti-communist. So even though he was Stalin's enemy, he had a kind of respect for his statesmanship and his abilities as a general.
Right.
And Roosevelt let him off because he was an ally against the communists, but also Horthy did assert independence from Germany and independence from Hitler. So just to wrap this segment up for tonight, and we will have to have you back to dive into more detail, but what happened there? When did that happen? When did the daylight begin to appear between Horthy and Hitler, and why?
Right. Well, it happened sometimes in 1944, because Horthy, in spite of being allied with Hitler, was all the time trying to maintain good relations with the West.
Right.
Horthy was trying to sit on two chairs, something what, I could find beautiful parallels in today's politics as well.
Many examples of that. So
many examples of that.
Let's stick with this one. Yes.
Exactly. So we'll stick with Horthy. So Hitler knew that. Hitler knew that Horthy was secretly having a particularly good relations with London. London was now. This is interesting, and again, this might be interesting to our audience that doesn't know that Serbia used to be a kingdom. Serbia used to be originally a kingdom of Serbia. All right, and the royal family of Serbia is related to the British royal family. And even to these days, you've got 3 crown princes of Serbian origin. All them are in line for the British throne, among the first 100, pretenders to the throne. So Britain said to Horthy, look, don't you dare help Hitler occupy any part of Serbia, because then you're becoming our enemy. However, Horthy, of course, could not resist the temptation of finally occupying that part of Serbia, and at that point, London declared war on Hungary. But nevertheless, Horthy still continued to maintain good relations with London. Horthy was kind of telling them, look, yes, I'm allied with Hitler, but you know what? I can become your ally. If you don't mind, I can just fly over to your side, and that's nothing new in our international politics today. We can just all laugh, and we laugh about those who just there's a certain name we have for those who fly over to another side in politics and so on. So sometimes in 1944 it was already cracking up, because Hungary realized Hitler was losing. Because besides, speaking of Russians, crazy Russians, of course, they never lose any war because they're as crazy as they can be. It was in the 1943, I think. It was the winter of 1943 in Voronezh. It's one of the Russian cities, and in 1943, the Hungarian army was totally defeated by the Russians, including the Hitler's army anyway. And so the remains of that army, in such a pitiful state, came, withdrawing, came to Hungary, that people thought, oh no, look at what this. How come that our army can be defeated like this? And Horthy realized that the war, the winning side was now turning, and that, as we said, the wheel of luck is now turning, to the Allies. So Horthy thought, well, here is an opportune moment to just desert Hitler and fly over to the Allies. Hitler felt it. Hitler knew it was going to happen. So Hitler just first invited him to Austria. And while the Hungarian delegation was in Austria, he did a very quiet occupation of Hungary. It was called Operation Margarita. So in Operation Margarita, he basically occupied Hungary, and came and brought to power the totally pro-Nazi Szálasi, Ferenc Szálasi, man who was a totally pro-Nazi. I mean, I don't know how to compare him to whom, today, but he was a totally pro-Hitler, pro-Nazi anyway. So that government, which came sometimes in October 1944, when Horthy was basically deposed by Hitler, and then Szálasi came, and then came the horrendous massacre of the Jews, and very similar to what happened in January 1942 in Novi Sad. They were just, in Budapest, Jews were hiding in various places. You remember probably Raoul Wallenberg, who was trying to help them escape with all these false passports. There was a lovely movie.
I remember him well. He was Swedish.
Yes,
I remember him well. Yeah.
Yes, he was Swedish. He was probably one of the greatest heroes of all the times. The way how he is portrayed in the movie, basically knocking Jews out of the trains to be deported to concentration camps is beautiful. And but nevertheless, this Szálasi regime was just hunting for the Jews, basically for the Jews in Budapest, and taking them to the bank of Danube, and then basically killing them and throwing them into Danube. I don't know, that kind of specialty to kill people and throw them into frozen river. It's sorry, I hope nobody is offended, but it's a Hungarian kind of recipe for exacting murder. Because I've never seen. I've tried, I've searched in history. Has any nation anywhere, has any nation experienced anything like that? No. The Jews were never killed in no nation in that way. The Serbs were never killed. No other nationality was ever killed by being, thrown under the icy river, which is horrible. But at the same time, it just explains to you why. Because the river will take them away, and then you have no traces of crime. Right. Here you have a perfect crime. And then, you cannot have forensic research because you don't know how many people were killed, really. All the documents are burned. So that's what it was. So
and we're gonna have to end it there due to time. But that is also one of the things you did in your work, is to go and find those names and document those names.
Yes.
And that's one reason why your book is important. The book was published in 2012, and then the UN archives were unveiled or opened up in 2015, and certain documents became more public, and much of the work in your book was corroborated when those UN archives were opened up in 2015. We are unfortunately out of time. So any brief comment that you would like to make and leave our audience with? And as I mentioned, we will have to bring you back.
Right. Well, brief comment. Hey, people, there was a genocide that none of you knew. No, none of you knew who was the first Hitler's ally in Europe. It is Genocide Revealed now. It's revealed. It's bare open to all of your research and your knowledge, and it belongs to all of humanity. And it carries lessons for us today. So do not allow yourself to be in darkness anymore. You have Genocide Revealed. It's revealed, and it's revealed at the right time, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Sasha Aleksandar Veljic. We will have you back. We'll go to one more quick commercial break. When we return, I may have Dan Sanderson in the studio at that time. We will quickly pick a comment, deliver a free copy of Aleksandar's book to somebody here in the US, most likely, and we will tell you about next week's show. don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. And Sasha, thank you very much for being here. We will have you back. Dan,
Yeah.
thank you for being with me backstage throughout this presentation by Sasha Veljic. We did not get into the topic of how the anti-Semitism that has been present for thousands of years is resurfacing, has metastasized. That's for a future show. But I'm grateful that we were able to highlight this important book. There's the QR code. We hope that people will scan it. I think at one point we had over 2,500 live viewers tonight. Very popular show on this channel. And I want to thank Sasha for doing that pre-recorded show, and encourage anyone who wants to pre-order the paperback. This is a book that has been retailing for about $30, and we've got a special deal on the pre-order of the paperback for about $15. So I hope people will take advantage of that, and we'll be looking at comments. You've still got a chance to get your comment in there and get a free copy of that book. So Dan, over to you. You had a chance to listen to the presentation. Perhaps there was a lot of history that you weren't specifically aware of. Also a perspective from behind the Iron Curtain on events that even here in the West, people may not have been aware of even at the time. As I mentioned in one of my comments, Admiral Horthy did get off scot-free at the Nuremberg war trials, despite the fact that he was a willing participant in committing genocidal war crimes, in which thousands of people were murdered based on their ethnicity, civilians. Dan, input, thoughts, comments on tonight's show?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to take listeners, as it took myself, a long time to try and find out what his headline thesis was on the book. Like, what is his claim to history? And then it finally
I can summarize that, and that is that these war crimes were covered up. They were not known at the time that they happened. They did not come out during the Nuremberg trials, and so there is a separate unknown genocide that was perpetrated by Admiral, or under the Regency awareness of Admiral Horthy. And there is evidence in the book that points directly to Admiral Horthy. And as Sasha pointed out, his thesis is that this was due to territorial ambitions, restoring the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and creating a portion of land that was ethnically Hungarian versus the diverse ethnic makeup of that land prior to his regency.
Yeah,
all under the shadow of Hitler, behind the front lines, in the background, unbeknownst to the world. And that Sasha's painstaking original research, literally going around to graveyards of where some of the markers were put up for these people, and talking to the survivors, putting together the list of names and the photographs and the documentation that's featured in the book. I also contributed a translation of an obscure Swedish article that was located about these events.
Wow.
that was located in an archival copy of this Swedish national newspaper at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think when someone goes to such great lengths to pursue the independent investigation of truth as he has, I don't know, is it just, do we relegate to the fact that that's up to history to decide? I mean, I guess it's like shows like this that give it the airtime. Ultimately, listeners like we have, that it's up to them to.
Tonight's show is to encourage people to get the book that has the documentation and the facts. We're not trying to present the documentation and the facts on this show.
Yeah, well, I'd agree with that. I haven't read the book yet. But I mean, I'm speaking in more general terms, that if his claims are true, and it is genocide revealed, and if it is something that the Nuremberg trials overlooked and was covered up, that's a serious claim on humanity there.
Well, the part about the Nuremberg trials, you can Google it. And again,
yeah.
When this book was published in 2012, archives from shared. I don't know why. Maybe it was a 50-year anniversary. So in 2015, or excuse me, 2015. What would that have been? 60 years after the war, 70 years after, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
They were unveiled for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. That was the date, we were very gratified that there was documentation in that. But that was now 8 years ago, so more information is available about Horthy's culpability and how he escaped the Nuremberg war trials. The specific information in Sasha's book was not unveiled by the UN archives. The damning evidence against Admiral Horthy, personally, specifically, and his role at a high level, is what was clear from some of the documents that were shared when the UN shared its archives.
Wow, yeah, really interesting. Well, towards the last sentence of the show, as I was continually trying to vet it against the cold hard facts of anti-Semitism.
That was an aspirational title before the interview.
Yeah, but something dawned on me was that if you can equivocate Nazi Germany with anti-Semitism, which is not too far of a stretch, right? I mean, the entire idea of that.
To put
right?
it mildly.
Well, exactly, but it's like, if you could say the cold hard facts about Nazi Germany but that's not. It was the larger project of Nazi Germany was anti-Semitism, and it was very much a would we say it's a Serbian influence, or it was a
No. So let me explain the reason for the title, which again was created before the interview. The reason for the title was not that we spent the hour of the show illustrating it, but the intent of the title was, anti-Semitism is nothing new. It has been going on for thousands of years, and it has taken on many different forms over those 1,000 years. And this was another instance of an unknown attack in which Jews were implicated. And again, Hitler's anti-Semitism, Nazi Germany's anti-Semitism provided cover for territorial ambitions, which also ended up impacting Jews in that region. And of course, it is also, this was not the intent, but there is anti-Semitism raging around the world today in a completely different context.
Well, I remember hearing something from a reporter from the Free Press, Barry Weiss. She started it, right? And she said that the anti-Semitism, or the increase in anti-Semitism, and the escalation and severity in societies with anti-Semitism are really this a litmus in history for how healthy the society is. And if we see uprisings in America or Canada or anywhere else around the world, then this is a warning sign. This is a real sit up and pay attention moment.
Well, and as you know, on this show, I've drawn the correlation between the establishment of the Nation of Israel in 1948 and the establishment of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So, yes, in that sense, a very definitive litmus test in human history, one that I believe is prophetically documented in a number of holy texts across the Bible, the Quran, and other writings, in terms of those events happening at a specific point in time. I'm not going to get into that on tonight's show at all, but the self-determination of peoples has always been a problem throughout human history. Human history is just one gory story after the other of people, killing other people for lots of reasons, going way back to the story of Cain and Abel in the book of Genesis, two brothers. But then that aggregates and metastasizes throughout human history. And, this situation with the Jewish people is but one example, but it is a persistent one, and one that is a major topic in the Bible, the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament Christian scriptures. And it is a focal point of Western civilization for that reason. And lo and behold, the establishment of the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, and the Declaration of Human Rights coincidentally happened in the same year, and I don't think that's a coincidence. And I've shown my correlation to that elsewhere. So I'm going to thank Boy Howdy, and unless you have any objections, there've been a number of comments here, but award him a copy of this book. And if you've already ordered one through that QR code because you'd said earlier that you were willing to buy it, that's awesome. Perhaps buy one and we'll send you 2 copies, and you can give one to a friend. But in any case, unless Dan, you've got any objections.
No, I thought that was a good one. Yeah.
I'm going to award the free copy to you based on a number of your comments, including the fact that you agreed with us when we decided not to name the book Genocide Revealed, Hitler's Mentor. But because I happen to have a copy here, there's one of the pictures from the book, the sort of glare here, but there you see Hitler following behind in Admiral Horthy's footsteps. And there's another one here that I will share from the book, which is Hitler enjoying a ride around, sitting next to the senior statesman Admiral Horthy during World War II. Both of them smiling and happy. So there are many, many other pictures in the book. I actually had somebody write to me and tell me that they were able to get a copy of this book to one of their surviving relatives before they passed, documenting and affirming a situation that they had lived with their entire life, knowing that one of their relatives had been a victim, and nobody knew about it, and it was completely hidden and covered up. Wow. So anyway, thank you so much, Boy Howdy. We need you to send your address to info@soupllc.com to get your free copy. And by the way, I hope you're in the US. Otherwise, we'll see what we can do. Now, next week, we have Imam Mikhail Abdus Salam. He appeared on the show many months ago. He is the founder of Interfaith Library. And so he is a Muslim who is seeking to improve relations amongst the religions. The lamb laying down with the lion and the wolf. And he's had quite a journey since we last had him on the show. And anyone who's been a longtime fan might remember we had him on the show from a hotel room with a spotty internet connection, and the audio was atrocious. And we weren't really even fully aware of how bad it was. And we kind of didn't have a choice at the time. But he assures us he's got high-speed internet now, and we look forward very much to talking to him. He will be covering the topic of the Quran for beginners. There are many ideas and thoughts about who Muhammad was and what the Quran is. And from an imam, we will get to learn about the Quran for beginners and why he founded the Interfaith Library. So looking forward to that. This same time, same place, 8 o'clock Central, right here on this channel next week. Mikhail Abdus Salam. Dan, my cat is saying, get off this show. Actually, my daughter's cat. This is Licorice. You may have noticed that Sasha had a cat in his lap at the beginning of the show as well. I can't remember if I asked him what his cat's name was. But Licorice just loves to make an appearance here when I'm sitting at length in this chair. Dan, any thoughts that you would like to share here as we wrap up for tonight?
I have one question that you may or may not know the answer to. Right in the beginning of the interview, Sasha explained that his name is Alexander as well. Alexandra.
His name is Alexander. Sasha is his nickname that his mother gave him.
And he said there was one other word or one other name, but he's not going to say it. And so you must know, like, what's that? Is it an embarrassing name, or is it something that?
I don't think so. I think he was saying there are two common nicknames for people named Alexander, and this is the one his mother chose. Even though this is the one that is also gender neutral, it can be used for boys and girls, like Kelly.
Right.
But I think it's just a matter of preference as to whether, you call
what's the other name? What's the other name for Sasha?
I don't know.
Maybe other name for Alexander.
Alex or Lexi, or who knows?
Lexi, maybe, I don't know.
I don't. I have no clue. I don't speak Serbsky Hrvatsky. I used to be able to say that. My tongue is getting old. My lips are getting old. And there was this lovely young lady who taught me a few words of Serbsky Hrvatsky, Jajem Jaje, and so on. Way back in the day when I was really exercising my linguistic capabilities many moons ago. But no, I don't know that much about Russian. Anyway, I won't now start speaking Russian either. I do that a little bit better, but obviously I'm out of practice.
Maybe for another show.
Niet. The one thing I remember about Russian is when I was learning it, there was this one phrase in the Russian book that we had, and it went something like this: "Da u nas v drevnje televizor." And in learning that phrase, which simply means yes, we have television in Drevnia, it just gave me this feeling that Russian sounds like a language being spoken backwards. You know those when you record something, you play it backwards. Da u nas v drevnje televizor. It just sounds like that backwards speaking, right? And it was a very difficult language. They've got 7 different cases. They've got a different way of expressing animate and inanimate masculine nouns, and the grammar is just incredibly atrocious. And the problem is, like in a lot of areas in Germany, the people don't speak good German, but it's okay because it's a dialect. But if you're a foreigner, you can't come in and learn the dialect. You have to learn proper German. But it's actually hard, and it's hard to learn it because the people you're learning it from, they're not speaking proper German.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, well, we could get into the grammars of creation, but that's an interesting topic
Well,
in
and
itself, right?
alluding to a future show, and on this topic of getting a different perspective on truth, we will be having Dan back along with Joe Atman, who's been on the show before, the author of I'm drawing a blank on his book now. Something about a war. Anyway, it's a philosophical war, I think, is the name of the book.
Philosophical war. That's it.
But he gets into the nature of reality and our exploration of it, and we'll be actually trying to tackle. I'll be working with these two philosophers, Dan and Joe, on the topic of what is truth. Pilate's famous question of Jesus. That's coming up. We're also going to have Barbara Breon back on the show. Barbara has since launched her own podcast. She featured me in an interview, and I'll be returning the favor. And she'll be talking about some of the programs that we're doing together to help young people through experiential leadership. So I want to thank everyone that was tuning in tonight. We did at one time have over 2,000 viewers live in the studio. So we appreciate all the efforts and the traction that the show is beginning to gain. And look forward to having you back next week with Imam Makai Abdus Salam. So everyone, may God be with you over the coming week, and may he bless your efforts in your independent investigation of reality. I'm your host, Wade Franson, and I will see you then. Bye for now.